in another condition, people were explicitly asked, please be creative. Just those three words were added. And what happened is that people, when explicitly asked, essentially when required to be creative, were indeed more creative in their thinking.
Mm.
And that really made me think about the nature of how we talk about creativity.
Welcome to Closer to Truth. I'm speaking with Zorana Ivcevic Pringle, creativity expert and author of the engaging, practical new book, The Creativity Choice, The Science of Making Decisions to Turn Ideas into Action. Zorana says, to turn inspiration into real achievement, you must decide to act. We'll find out what that means. Welcome, Zorana. It's good to see you again. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, before we dig into the details of the book, which I really enjoyed, learned something too, a quick question. In all of your researching of creativity over your career, what was your biggest surprise? Did you have an aha moment of insight at any point?
Yeah, I did. Actually, my biggest surprise was very early on how I even became interested in the topic of creativity. I read something that was written by a foundational scholar in creativity research, Frank Barron, and he said in a one line that creative individuals are in the same time more sane and more insane than the general population.
Ah,
And I thought it was aesthetically beautiful way of putting it. Did not quite know what it meant, but was very intrigued by it. And what it really means is that creative individuals oftentimes tend to embody contradictions. So, in the
ah.
same time, they have some psychological vulnerabilities, but also strengths that help counteract them. And that's pretty exceptional in the general population.
So how did you follow that in your research? In essence, looking at both ends or both tails of the distribution, you have a higher representation in creative individuals.
Well, you can separately measure strengths and vulnerabilities, and then there are statistical techniques that allow you to treat them not as just separate, but create a profile so that you're creating profiles of people who have just one, just the other, or both high or both low, and then you see in which of these groups of people they are more creative individuals. In this case, in my own research, I was looking at people in artistic who are artistic professionals, but Frank Barron has done it in different ways with other professionals too.
What personality traits and what tests for those do you use to exemplify both intense sanity and intense insanity?
It's in when he was writing about sanity and insanity, that was little bit of a poetic license there, of
Sure, sure,
course.
sure, sure.
We don't tend to use those words, but it's more of an attention grabber to to make you think of, okay, there are these contradictions, seeming contradictions, or contradictions that are most often contradictions, but occasionally not. And one thing that you have hinted in your question is a distribution from sanity to insanity, or from lower end of a trait to higher end of a trait. And it turns out that it's not just a single dimension. These can be present in the same time, not on a single continuum.
And what are some specific examples, some traits that would be used to represent these kinds of abstract notions when you either
Yeah.
do self testing of people or third party evaluation?
We could do either. So we can ask people to describe themselves. In this particular case, in the research that I have done, I have looked at emotional vulnerabilities, such as susceptibility to stress and anxiety and depression specifically.
Uh-huh.
And there are self-report measures that are really asking about people's experience. So they are questions that are asking people how they perceive the world, their typical feelings and ways of thinking.
So,
And then, Mhm.
just to dig a little deeper, give me one example of a test question that you might ask me in terms of evaluating my stress. Would you say on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, how often do you feel stressed? I mean, what is the specific baseline data that you're accumulating?
How much do you agree with statements like "I get easily perturbed by
Okay,
events in my life," uh,
okay,
or "I react very strongly when something unpleasant happens," for
okay.
example?
And then methodologically, how do you score for self-deception? In other words, I don't want to, say I'm stressed all the time, but I don't want you to know that. So I'll kind of skew my answer, even subconsciously, to what I think will make me look like a better person.
There are ways of methodologically dealing with uh, self deception and or impression management. That is another thing that could be skewing results. Usually, that is not of a great concern with questions that are or studies that tend to be anonymous. So in our research, this was very low stakes. It is people who are volunteering for research in this case and completely anonymous. So people are not motivated to present themselves in a particular light.
Okay, so anonymity is good. Now, how about the self-selection of people who volunteer? That is not necessarily a representative sample, but adds kind of a fundamental skewing of the raw data.
Yes, potentially, certainly. So what we have done in this research is we have recruited from it was a sample of professional artists, and we have went online. We just looked at faculty at top art schools in the country, and we got in touch with all the faculty at these schools. Now, of course, what happened is that not everybody agreed to participate, so there is a skew in who is potential skew. We do not know whether there's a skew, but potentially there could be some skew in who chooses to participate.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
that is something that happens in the nature of the science, but that is why we want to replicate our findings.
Yeah.
And that's the importance of replication.
Great. Okay, well, look, let me give a better bio for you, and then we'll really get into it. So, Zorana Ivcevic Pringle is a senior research scientist at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, where she is director of the Creativity and Emotions Lab. We'll be talking a lot about emotions. Zorana studies the role of emotion and emotional intelligence in creativity and well being, as well as how to use the arts to promote emotion and creativity skills. Okay, Zorana, you say that creativity is a choice. That's not normally the way we think about creativity. So, what do you mean by choice, and how so?
Uh, I I have come across research that made me think of what is what happens in creativity that is difficult, that is a difference between doing something and not. And I found one particular piece of research really inspirational and really making me think what is going on here in people's heads. Um, there was an experiment set up where one group of people was asked to, given standard instruction, give as many possible answers as you can to a typical creative thinking test, which asks for hypothetical situations, such as what would happen if people became able to be invisible at will, or talk to animals, or what are all the possible uses you can think of for a tin can or a paperclip. And standard instruction is to ask for all possible ideas you can come up with. But then, in another condition, people were explicitly asked, please be creative. Just those three words were added. And what happened is that people, when explicitly asked, essentially when required to be creative, were indeed more creative in their thinking.
Mm.
And that really made me think about the nature of how we talk about creativity. We oftentimes talk about creativity as you cannot rush it, you cannot demand it. But it looks like we can. So, what is going on here? So, I wanted to dig more deeply into the process of what goes on in people's heads as they are considering whether they're going to share ideas and what ideas they're going to share.
So that's very interesting. Those three words change the, be creative, or two or three words, change the response. Is that something like priming in psychological experiments, or even now with AI, what they call RAG, retrieval augmented generation, where you ask a question, but then you give a context in which AI should evaluate your question?
Yeah, it is similar. It is similar in nature. So, what happens with priming? You are giving a very subtle hint to about something that is expected, or something that can shape the response. Here, it is very explicit. So, saying explicitly, please be creative, signals creativity is expected, and
Mm.
therefore you are more likely to behave in a similar way.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Let's go back a step and define creativity. How do you use that term?
Oftentimes I hear, "Oh, creativity," but we cannot define it. Actually, in creativity research, we call the definition of creativity the standard definition, because there's so much agreement in the field that we really truly know what creativity is and what we mean by that word.
Mm,
And it includes two parts. First is obvious. Uh, it is originality. So something that is creative is in some way original, but that is not enough. Something that is original can also be simply bizarre. The second part of the definition of creativity is that it includes effectiveness. It is the idea or the product or the performance is in some way effective for the goal it aims to achieve.
mm. You also define creativity a little bit in the negative by saying it's not about solving problems.
That is little to draw our attention away from those very quick associations we have with word creativity. We
Mm,
hear creativity, we feel, and then we hear problem solving or coming up with ideas. We discuss creativity and we go almost automatically to, oh, how did they think of that? With this assumption implicitly that that is the most important and most difficult, perhaps, part. Um, and I wanted to draw people's attention away from that,
yeah, I think
and specifically away from problem solving,
yeah,
um,
I think that's really an important
because
distinction. Yeah.
since uh, in creativity research, ever since Csikszentmihalyi and Getzels in the early 1970s, ran a series of studies on problem finding, we have realized that problem finding is really the core of the successful creative process.
Let me put a an asterisk next to Getzels, because Jacob Getzels, who you're referring to, is the father of Peter Getzels, who is Closer to Truth co-creator, producer, director, and my long-term partner. So it's great to have Jacob as well as Peter part of Closer to Truth. Okay, let's go on to what I think is a fundamental thesis that you have, is that generating the ideas is the easier part. And I'm not saying it's easy, but the easier part. And the implementation of ideas is the harder part, in essence, the great filter. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that is taking a very long story short, it is not necessarily just implementation, because little bit implementation assumes you have worked everything out, now you are just building it. It is little broader than that. So perhaps you start with an idea. Oftentimes, this idea changes in the course of the creative process. It grows, it changes in nature. I have just finished writing a book, and the book that I started with is not exactly started with as an idea, is not exactly the book that ended up being about to be published. And So it's not just implementation, although our mental shortcut goes idea, then implementation. There are a number of processes that happen in between too.
Good. You stress the importance of emotion in creativity. If I look at it superficially, emotion might seem to inhibit creativity more than enhance it. Granted, it should be managed, but how do you see emotion as part of the creative process?
Uh, so that is a very common way of looking at emotion as something that is in our way or that we have to manage in some way, and we do not realize how much there is power in emotion that we can harness and use positively to enhance the creative process.
Hmm.
Uh, and Emotion is related to creativity in a number of ways. So, first, there are emotion related reasons to engage in the creative process to begin with. Oftentimes, we are doing something because of emotional reasons. It's at the core of motivation, interest, passion, somebody's need, noticing frustration of others and wanting to help, and empathy. These could all be motivating parts of motivation and drive for creativity.
Hmm.
And then there is the aspect of, well, what do we do with emotions? It's not just about what emotions we experience, but what do we do with them?
You single out passion as an important subset of emotions. I certainly feel that way in terms of work I've done on Closer to Truth and other places, but mainly Closer to Truth. But you also limit it, saying it needs to be, the Goldilocks, just the right amount, because if you get too much, passion kind of degenerates into obsession.
There is a researcher in Canada, Valorant, who has studied different kinds of passion, and he called them harmonious versus obsessive passion,
Mm.
and found that harmonious passion, which is self-identification with an area of work, finding it important to one's identity and finding it motivating, and having this desire to engage with an activity is very beneficial for both one's mental health and for effectiveness, such as in creative work. When it veers into obsession, it can start being related to burnout. It is possible to still be, at least for a while, effective in the sense of productivity at work, but it can have also side effects, negative side effects of mental health and potential for endurance and longevity of our work.
It seems that your thesis is that creativity is, for lack of a better term, a natural state that everyone is or can be creative. And the challenge is eliminating the inhibitions or the obstacles to be creative. My superficial, naive assumption would have been the reverse, that creativity is the unnatural state and that its drivers must be learned, and that in addition, there are great gaps between the natural creative capabilities of diverse people.
I really struggle with the word natural, and I'm not sure that I would use it because people have their associations with the word natural that I think sometimes can lead us astray.
Okay.
So when we hear the word natural, oftentimes we also have associations of something is being inborn or something is, you come up with it in a less than effortful way. It comes naturally. We have this phrase. And I don't think this is the case with creativity. Creativity, I think that there is a potential for creativity that can be developed to various extents by everyone. But I certainly think it is effortful. It is not something that you wait for and then happens when the muses come and visit you, but it's something that you have really worked for.
You focus on creative self efficacy. What is that?
Creative self efficacy is really a technical term, psychological term for what we oftentimes call confidence or confidence about our own creativity. Um, and self efficacy is a little bit more specific than necessarily confidence in the sense of it is specific to a particular task. You can have self efficacy for one kind of creative task, but not necessarily another. So to give a personal example, before I started writing a book, I was confident. I had this creative self-efficacy that I can write creative scientific papers and book chapters and develop theories. But before I started writing a book, was not a science communicator, and I wasn't quite sure whether I could effectively do that in a creative way.
And so I note the point that you make that creative self efficacy is often lowest at the start, and your own personal example exemplifies that.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes when we hear the word confidence, we think it's an either or proposition, but it is not. It is something that comes in degrees and something that changes throughout the work process. Wonderful studies by a colleague in Mexico, Rogelio Puente Diaz, have followed and asked people at different points in a creative process, long term creative process, about their level of creative self efficacy. And he found that at the beginning of the process, you are just starting it by the nature of creativity or doing something you haven't done before. Therefore, you're not quite so sure whether you can do it. And
Mm.
as you make progress, you build confidence. And at the very end, you are most certain that yes, that can be done and you can do it in the future. Although this is not, it sounds like a straight arrow from
Uh-huh.
low to high.
Yes,
It's not necessarily that. It can go
right.
up and down through the process too.
Right. I think we all experience that. So, what are some of the personality traits or states of mind that facilitate creativity?
There is one central trait of creative individuals, and that is openness to experience. What openness to experience means is people's tendency to think in original ways, be interested and curious in trying something new that they haven't done before, You go to a restaurant, you are not going for your comfort food every single time. You are trying something new. You are going and traveling to places you haven't been. Um, and you are engaging with ideas from different perspectives and wanting to engage in a conversation about them.
Hmm. So let's make a practical a test here. So I've been doing Closer to Truth for 25 years. Peter Gassels and I have worked together for almost 20 years. We have a very good system. A lot of people appreciate what we do. If I came to you and you're familiar with Closer to Truth and said, Zorana, please teach us how to be more creative for Closer to Truth. What are the kinds of advice you would give or experiences that you would ask us to try to expand our ways of thinking?
I love this question because you have so much going on here. You are a team, you are a core team of two, and you have worked for a very long time together. You are doing, I personally think, wonderfully creative work, but you have to keep it fresh. And if you are working on something for 25 years, uh, here's a challenge. It's a challenge not just make one creative product, but do it repeatedly. And if the challenge is to do something repeatedly and be reliably creative, then we are really talking about the social side of creativity. And I would point you to harnessing the power of social relationships to keeping it fresh and to continuously do something that is going to be surprising, that is going to be effective, and keep being original.
Good. That's true. And oftentimes, when I'm working on Closer to Truth, I'm just busy with scripts and people and isolated in the middle of the night with my computer. And Peter is working on editing and making sure the final product is perfect in terms of color and sound and everything else. So we're in kind of a procedural rut, even though our content we think is very exciting. So we'll try to uh, move out of our shells and be a little bit more social on your advice. So you have an interesting
Yeah, and
go
it
ahead. All the advice you can give us, we're open.
there is yeah, so I can be even more specific than that.
Okay.
So what you have there with your relationship is what researchers call uh, strong tie. You are working together for a long time. You have a strong relationship where you know each other's perspectives, that you can, oftentimes uh, probably, I am assuming here, but oftentimes in strong relationships we know what each other think. We are very familiar with our kinds of ideas that occur to us. So the practical thing here, and especially when you mentioned being isolated in your own bubbles, is to get out of the bubble. And that's where strong relationships can be complemented with weak relationships. And what are weak relationships or weak ties? Those are ties with people who are kind of on the outskirts of our social networks, or who are not even in our social network at a particular time, but we can connect with these individuals through our own networks. And because we are not consistently talking with them, we are not familiar with their backgrounds, having these conversations can expand our own thinking.
Hmm. Well, Peter and I don't have to pay our psychiatrists. We just have to listen to your very wise advice.
Well, thank you.
I like your phrase, and it relates to what we are just talking about. That creativity is built on psychological safety. So that would not have been my way of thinking. That it's almost creativity would be built on psychological disruption or agitation, not safety.
Mm. It is. it is safety here does not mean you are being intellectually safe. You are not staying with safe ideas. Safety is that social environment that you are certain you are not, or you trust that sharing ideas, even those disruptive ideas, even those ideas that are going to rattle the boat and be truly different and unconventional, is not going to, that you're not going to be punished, that you are not going to be ostracized, um, that it is going to be safe in this social environment. So
Ah.
we are talking about psychological safety in our environment in order for us to take intellectual risks into unknown territory.
Yeah, and that's very true. For example, the business world that I'm familiar with, in sometimes in corporations, if people fail doing something, that's a permanent career ender, or at least it puts a ceiling on where they can go. And yet, I know at least one venture capitalist, a different way of thinking, has said that he would never invest in an entrepreneur unless that entrepreneur has failed at least once before. And so, two radically different ways of thinking.
Yes, exactly. If you are not allowed to fail, and certainly there are degrees of failure and kinds of failure, but if you are never allowed to fail, you are not going to be taking any risks. You are going to be making a calculation of what is safe. Sometimes we call it reasonable, and organizational psychologists have studied this connotation of what people deem reasonable and found that it really becomes a barrier to daring to share original ideas.
When I was running my merger and acquisition company in an earlier lifetime, I don't mean literally a different lifetime, but many decades ago, one of the senior investment bankers was trying to impress me one day, and he said that all of the ideas that he has had has worked, and therefore he deserves a larger bonus. And I said, the problem is, if all of your ideas have worked, that means you have too few ideas.
Or the ideas that he has are staying on the safe side, they're never trying to do something new.
Right. All right, let's end with what we like to do, some very short questions, and the answers have to be extremely short. If one word answer, three-word answers, no more than a sentence or two. So here we go. Question one: what are your favorite traits of creative people?
Openness to experience.
Two: what are your favorite methods or techniques to enhance creativity?
Just tell people, hey, be creative.
Three: what is the simplest technique to become creative that somebody could apply almost immediately?
That's it. You just tell people, hey, be creative, and give them the permission.
That's a great answer, and you have the data to support that. Um, Next, can you assess creativity in animals?
I don't know. I don't study that, and I will leave it aside.
Good. That's a fair answer. That's what I would have thought as well. Five. Do psychedelics enhance creativity, and would you take psychedelics to enhance your own creativity?
I personally would not because I'm chicken, but this is a new area of research, and I think it's promising.
Can AI ever be creative as we are creative?
AI can produce things that look creative, not in the same way.
Next to last, do you ever encounter anything like ESP, extrasensory perception, or parapsychology in your work on creativity? Because the other way around is people claim that more creative people have more parapsychological capabilities. I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying that's the claim.
I have not seen research that has replicated showing that.
Finally, what are the dangers of creativity?
Oh, there are dangers of creativity. There's a whole area of creativity research on dark creativity, creativity for dark or nefarious ends.
And are those characteristics different than creativity for more positive results?
The key difference is intention. Intention for what are the goals of this work, for positive ends or for negative ends.
Many thanks, Zorana. Viewers can watch over 1,000 Closer to Truth videos and dozens of TV episodes on consciousness, including some on creativity, on the Closer to Truth website and YouTube channel. All facets of consciousness, that's mystery, brain function, free will, personal identity, creativity, panpsychism, dualism, idealism, parapsychology, souls and spirits, life after death, cosmic consciousness, including some videos with Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, all infused with creative thinking. We appreciate your support of Close to the Truth, telling your friends, liking our videos, donating as you can. Thanks for watching. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like and comment below. You can support Closer to Truth by subscribing. Closer to Truth is now accepting your tax-exempt donations. Please come to closertotruth.com/donate. Thank you very much for supporting us, and thanks for watching.